Hi, I'm the Pink Pastor. Thank you for joining us today. For those who are returning, thank you. And for those who are joining new, we're glad to have you with us. So today I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to do an interview with a friend of mine. Kenneth and I have been friends for over 20 years. And one of the journeys I've gotten to watch with her is the journey from believer to atheist back to believer. By her own words, she is the failed atheist. And so I just thought we'd talk to her a little bit about that journey today. Um, so, so tell me. I mean, I remember back, you know, nice Southern girl up in Connecticut, and
Southern girl went to all Methodist college. My joke is I'm so Methodist. The only thing I haven't done is date a Methodist minister or be a Methodist minister. So, yep. Yep, that's what's with me. Yeah.
right.
I went to all women's college, went to Wesleyan, all Methodist women's college, grew up Methodist, and yeah, and sweet little Southern girl believer, complete total.
So talk to me for a second about what it was that made you decide maybe faith wasn't for you, maybe you should be an atheist.
Well, it started when you kind of become self aware when you're a teenager, especially as a girl or a woman, young woman. In the church, you don't really have a place. And as I was struggling with that, and we got a really conservative minister who was not pro woman, I it was very frustrating. And so I kind of had to make a decision. Am I going to be a feminist who wants women to have equal opportunity, or am I going to be a good Christian? And I had that kind of pushed me to say, no, I can't really square that circle. And so that's was the kind of the start of the journey is I can't really be in a church that doesn't allow me to have full autonomy and allow full participation. So that was where it started.
So as you've watched the church over the years, I mean, some parts of the church haven't grown, some parts of the church have grown. How has that affected your journey as you've watched those things change?
Well, the church changing has been really good. The big struggle has been the advent of the conservative Christian right and that evangelical movement, and that becoming like the primary voice of the church was just it kept me away from going back to the traditional faith because like, well, I'm never going to be politically on that side, and it's the loudest voice, and it just kept decisions that they did and made, especially that against the LGBTQ community, not supporting like Black Lives Matter, not supporting anything. And then, it just made it frustrating to walk back into the church. And even though I was proud of the Methodist Church and a lot of decisions it made, still you had this really loud portion that was Christian conservative evangelical. And it just made it impossible. It just drove me further and further away from my faith.
Right. So what, I mean, and at one point you were married to a Jew,
Yeah,
you know?
our mutual friend,
Right.
my darling Ian, my non-practicing atheist Jew who cooked pork and bacon better than any human being known to man. You know, he was a really smart, and he got me reading like Douglas Adams, and then reading Christopher Hitchens, and then you go down there to reading the Selfish Gene, and so I started dabbling in the atheist space as a just put your toe in the water because I was really looking for community, a community that accepted everybody as equals, that didn't judge the different communities of people for being different, or
Right.
and so yeah, that kind of led me down that path because those were things he liked to read. So, and yeah, and it's like, oh, okay, this kind of makes sense to me. I can understand this stuff. I wasn't offended by it.
Right.
So I was like, okay, well, maybe I am an atheist. Maybe this will square the circle and I'll feel more comfortable. But that turned out to not really take either. I mean, I tried really hard. I read all the books. I read all the right things. I joined the Godless Engineering Atheist group on Facebook, but yet I also joined the liberal left Christian group. And it's like, so I'm like, I'm literally in two sides all the time. And it was my father and my brother and I. My brother studied religion as a minor. and we were in my house in Birmingham, and there's three of us in the pool just chit chatting. And my dad said something that was really profound. He says, just don't read yourself into atheism. He says, it's good to read these things and it's important, but when just don't read yourself all the way there. And I was like, okay, Dad, I can handle that. So I was like, well, maybe he's right. Maybe I need to stop just totally reading atheist stuff and read more other things. And so as I kind of backed off from that and then saw that the atheist community was just as sexist and judgmental as the Christian community, even worse, where like there were no, the prominent female feminist voices in atheism were being stomped on just as hard as, the nuns in the Catholic Church that wanted to be able to have more purchasing as a Catholic. I'm like, well, crud. The same thing's happening in both communities. Now what? And so I spent about 5 years doing now what? And which was just as frustrating. It's like, well, where do I belong? Where do where is a good place to be? As a woman and someone who, wants to kind of have a faith, but, because atheism just never took, like I told you.
Right.
I tried really hard,
And that's, yeah.
Yeah.
So what was the turning point? What was the thing that finally pushed you back towards the faith community?
Well, I started reading, I'm an avid reader. I like history stuff. And I went down a rabbit hole of books that did literary discussions about the Bible. It was like, are the parts of the Bible forgery? The Bible as a book constructed. And it was really fascinating. And I read a lot of those and just happened to get in a conversation about 3 years ago with my brother. There's 18 months age difference between us. He has always had a very strong faith. And I thought he was, but he's also managed to stay quite liberal, very good feminist. And we just happened to be sitting down talking, and I mentioned a couple books I was reading, and then he mentioned a couple books he was reading, and then we realized we had been reading the same books. And we started talking about faith, and I realized that the community I was looking for was sitting next to me and was a blood relative. That if he could be in a church, because he, never stopped going to church, and feel the way he did, and I could find community and I could go back to church because I'd found my community. He was sitting right there, like I said, my baby brother. And so it gave me permission, I felt, actually divine intervention, to go find a church. And so I started working my way to being ready to go find a church.
And so where are you at today?
Well, I moved to Columbia, Tennessee about 2 years ago. Spent a year just trying to get my feet underneath me. And then one Thursday night, I was like, I need to go to church. So I Googled churches, Methodist churches here in Columbia, and stumbled upon First United Methodist and read through all the stuff they were doing. They were doing a lot of community outreach, and not just like on the surface stuff, like really hardcore community stuff, which totally appealed to me. So I emailed them, and I got an email back the next day from the assistant pastor, which was a female. Both their assistant pastors were women, and I was like, oh, okay, this is good. This is really cool. And so I went. It was July, last weekend in July in 2019, and I went to church for the first time in 20 years. And I was happy.
Our faith changes over time, and that's okay. We as people change over time, and that's okay. And if we're really going to be open about who we are and about allowing everybody to be who they need to be, then these conversations need to continue happening. In part so we can see what other people are doing and start to go, that makes sense and that doesn't. And, that's okay. Wherever you're at on your journey, be glad you're there and know that it's a journey and you just continue on. So.
And you're not the only one.
No.
That's the thing I found out. You're not the only one going through what you went through.
Right.
And we think that we're so isolated in our situation. And we surprisingly aren't. You know someone else who's struggling with the same thing. It's just someone would say, out loud what they're going through would make all the difference in the world.
Right.
We keep all that stuff bottled up, and I think that's, maybe it's Americans or whatever why we do it. But just saying, hey, I have this problem, or I'm going through this journey, or I'm having this question. There's somebody else
who's in exactly the same spot and needs to hear your voice so that they know they're not alone.
Yeah, because that's the worst thing is when we feel like we're alone in whatever crisis we're going through.
Yeah. So, to close, I'm the Pink Pastor. You can find me on social media, Facebook, pinkpastor365, Gmail, if you want to send me an email, pinkpastor365@gmail, or you can find me on Instagram, pinkpastor. That's where I get more regular updates. I try to post here every Friday, and depending on how I'm doing, that may or may not happen. So, thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Kenneth, for sharing with us.